This is St Andrews, South Brisbane. Please turn to Genesis chapter 13 on page 12 in the Church Bibles. Have you noticed how sometimes the hardest decisions come not in times of scarcity, but in times of abundance? When there's little on offer, the choice is almost made for us. But when there's plenty to choose from, when the supermarket aisle stretches endlessly, or when we're weighing up which path in life looks best, then it can be surprisingly difficult. Every day we face decisions, big and small. What to buy, where to live, how to spend our time, which opportunities to pursue. When faced with such choices, we are challenged to look beyond what immediately attracts us and seek the path God desires for us. That's the situation we encounter in Genesis 13. Abram has returned to the land of Canaan after his time in Egypt. You may remember that in Egypt, Abram faltered. He had feared famine and took matters into his own hands. But now, back in the promised land, he has learned something. But the Lord alone is his security and provider. Instead of scheming, Abram turns back to worship. He returns to the altar he first built and calls on the name of the Lord. Verse 4. But almost straight away, a new test comes. This time, it's not famine that brings trouble, it's prosperity. Abram and his nephew Lot have so much livestock and so many possessions that the land cannot sustain them both. Verses 6 and 7. Abundance, rather than scarcity, creates conflict. And so, here we have a crisis of relationship among God's people. The way Abram and Lot respond will reveal where their security lies. That's our big idea this morning. The everyday decisions we make reveal whether our security lies in worldly appearances or in God's promises. Both Abram and Lot are blessed. Their herds are multiplying, their tents spreading, their wealth increasing. But instead of this being a source of joy, it becomes a source of tension. Verse 7 tells us, quarrelling arose. Their herders are squabbling over grazing land and water. The blessing of prosperity turns into a burden. It's striking how abundance often creates as many problems as scarcity. When we have little, we know we must rely on God. But when we have more, our hearts can become restless. We start comparing, competing, securing our patch. Let me share something from my own life. When I was younger, I had less personal wealth than I do now. And yet, I never worried about money. I didn't stay awake at night thinking about how much or how little I had. But now that I have more, I sometimes find myself wondering, is it enough? Should I have achieved more by now? What if I lose it? And I've realized that is worldly thinking. Instead of more making me more secure, sometimes it makes me more anxious. Having more doesn't necessarily make us more content. In fact, it can make us fearful of losing it. And that's exactly the problem here. Abundance has created quarrelling among God's people. Even in church today, Christians can find themselves divided over resources, status, or preferences. And how we handle those conflicts reveals where our trust really lies. Do we trust God enough for us to hold things loosely? So, abundance leads to quarrelling. How does Abram respond? Not by grasping, not by demanding, but by showing grace. In this situation, Abram could easily have pulled rank. He was older. He was the family leader. He was the one to whom God had made promises. He could have said, "Lot, this land belongs to me. Off you go." But notice what Abram does instead. Verses 8 and 9. "Let's not have any quarrelling between you and me. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right." This is remarkable. Abraham gives Lot the first choice. He doesn't insist on his rights. He values peace over power. This is a significant change from his time in Egypt. There, Abraham grasped at control, and it nearly ended in disaster. But here, he has learned. His actions flow from faith. The key principle is this: when you know God's promises are sure, you don't need to cling tightly to your rights. In our relationships, how quickly are we to insist on my rights, my way, my choice? Abraham shows us another way, the way of grace. Those who are secure in God's promises can let go of power for the sake of peace. What does Lot do with this generous offer? Verse 10 tells us. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Lot lifts up his eyes, and what he sees is lush, fertile land. It looks like Eden. It looks like Egypt. It looks like success. But verse 13 gives us the ominous warning. The people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Lot chose with worldly eyes. He smelt the money, but missed the danger. His criteria were material abundance, not spiritual well-being. In contrast, Abram stays in Canaan, the land of promise, trusting God's provision. Friends, how do you make decisions? The world says, look for comfort, for financial gain, for what looks best. God calls us to ask, will this help me grow in faith? Will this keep me close to God and his people? That's why Jesus taught us to pray, lead us not into temptation. So often, what looks most attractive may hide real spiritual danger. Lot's choice shows what the world values, but God calls Abram to look differently. Verses 14 and 15, God speaks to Abram again. Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Did you notice the contrast? Lot looked and chose based on appearances. Abram is told by God to look with eyes of faith. God reassures Abram, your future is secure, not because of your possessions, not because of your clever decisions, but because of my promise. And Abram responds by moving to Hebron, where he builds another altar and worships the Lord. Verse 18. His decisions begin and end with calling on the name of the Lord. Our future does not rest on our own cleverness or success. It rests on the faithfulness of God. That is our security, and because that is true, we are free to trust him, to obey him, even when the step looks costly. God's promise to Abraham invites us to reflect. Where do we place our security? I sometimes think back to 1996, when I was 32. I moved from the UK to Australia with no job lined up. At that time, it didn't seem reckless. I simply trusted that God would provide, and he did. Yet now, with more to protect, I find myself shuddering at the thought of such a move. Strangely, age has made me more cautious, not more confident in the God who has already proved himself faithful. That's the irony. The longer we walk with Christ, the more evidence we have of his provision. Yet, the more tempted we may be to cling to our own safety nets. But that is precisely the challenge of faith. To remember that security is not ultimately found in wealth or skillful planning or even in the wisdom of experience. True security is found in the promises of God. With age, we often think we're becoming wiser, more prudent. But if that so-called prudence makes us trust our safety nets more than God, then it's not wisdom, it's unbelief. In the story of Abram and Lot, one principle stands out. Where we place our trust shapes the way we live. Let's look again at how their choices unfolded. Lot, driven by appearances, wealth, and immediate gain, yet heading towards danger. Abram, free to show grace because his security is in God's promises. The challenge for us is clear. What shapes our decisions? Worldly security or trust in God's promises? And of course, we see the fullest example in Jesus. On the cross, he gave up his rights, his power, his glory, in order to secure for us peace with God. He made himself nothing so that we might receive everything. Our future is not secured by wealth or clever choices, but by Christ alone. That sets us free, free to let go of fear, free to show grace, free to make decisions shaped not by appearances, but by God's promises. Lot chose by sight, Abram chose by faith, and Jesus, the fulfillment of God's promise to Abram, gave up everything so that we might inherit everything. So the question isn't whether God is dependable, it's whether we will depend on him. Amen.